Hello, 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 family and friends. Happy Marvelous Monday. How are you today? I hope that you are well. I'm so excited that you are joining me. I'm your host, Carissa. This is what I do each and every Monday. Welcome to those of you who are tuned in for the first time. Welcome to the Facebook channel. I see I have some viewers who are live on YouTube, some viewers who are live on LinkedIn, and I also want to welcome those who are watching live on Twitter. And if you're watching the replay, thank you, thank you, thank you so much. Well, today is a juicy discussion. I want it to be a dialogue. I don't want it to be a monologue. And so, certainly, if you have questions, if you have comments, remarks, or observations, throw it in the comment box. All right. Let me know where you're tuned in from. Show me some love. Say, hey, girl, hey. Let me know which platform you're tuned in on. And so today I'm going to share some information that I believe will be extremely helpful for those of you who are landlords, your housing providers, your tenants, or you know someone who is. Please like, please tag, and or share this information today if you find it helpful. I promise that the information I share is not legal advice. However, I am sharing the industry's best tips and practices. And so today I'm excited to share this topic because I've been kind of touching on it a little bit, but I was just made aware that there is some sort of now federal attention as pertains to rental property that landlords must be aware of. So it doesn't matter if your rental property is available for people who are in some sort of housing subsidy program, or if it's a market tenant, if it's going to fit everybody the same. So please stay tuned because I'm going to share some valuable information today. All right. And I want this to be as user friendly as possible. So again, if you have questions, please do not hesitate to drop it in the comments section. And so today, the discussion is all about, if you had an opportunity to check out the description, let me bring it up on the screen for you in case you did not see the flyer. So we're talking about the White House rental housing mandate for landlords. Okay. So hot off the press. We're not really new as of yesterday or immediately new, but it is something that I know that a lot of viewers are not aware of. So I wanted to bring this to your attention. All right. And again, I'm delighted that you're here, that you're part of this discussion. And so I've been made aware of this, and I want you to know that as a landlord, as a property owner, and if you have someone managing your property, that your property manager should also be aware of this. And I know that in many cases, a lot of you know this information, but I don't want to assume that everybody has this information. Okay. And so the question today is, who does this impact? It impacts all rental housing providers in the United States. Did you know that in the United States that there are approximately, at least, well, actually it's estimated to be over 44 million rentals households, 44 million rental households in the United States alone. And that's a lot of people renting. Now, here's the one thing that I always say to my students. I tell them that for those students who are just getting into property management, I tell them that property management will be one of the industries that will always be in demand, because why? Everybody needs a place to stay. I mean, and then also, if you think about it, we're all tenants, whether you own it or you're renting from someone else. We're all tenants. Okay. And so it's imperative that we know what the laws are and how it impact those who are paying rent to housing providers and property managers and owners. Okay. Things are always changing. And so the Biden-Harris administration, they announced new actions to protect renters. It's not just for renters, it's for those who are purchasing as well. But since I specialize in landlord and tenant matters, I'm strictly just discussing the rental aspect of it. Okay. And so they rolled out a blueprint, And I'm going to get into that today. So I'm going to share some information for those of you who are landlords. And then I'm also sharing tips for tenants because I do get a large population of my viewers who are renters. Okay. And it doesn't matter if you're in a Section 8 program, if you're in rapid rehousing program, if you are in some sort of mental health program, or you're just a market renter, right? It doesn't matter what category you fall in as a tenant. This information is applicable. It covers all renters in the United States. All right. And so, surprisingly, there are, well, let me say that prior to this blueprint coming out, there was no federal standard for how landlords should operate their business. And technically, it's still not, but this is kind of like the basics, the basis, the foundation for landlords to build upon. Now, of course, there are local laws, there are local, federal, and state laws. Okay. But the laws are not the same in all jurisdictions. And that's one of the things that I say every week when I come live. I tell people that the laws are going to be different just depending on your jurisdiction. Okay. And so it's imperative for landlords and owners to know what the laws are now, especially since the Biden-Harris administration has now announced actions to protect renters and to promote rental affordability. And so that's all I'm discussing today. But of course, if you have questions, if you have comments, remarks, or observations, please, ma'am, please, sir. Doesn't matter if you're a landlord, if you're a housing professional, if you're a tenant, you just stumbled across one of these pages. You can throw your comment in the comment section and I will respond to it. So there are 5 principles aimed at ensuring that there is fairness when it comes to renters. And so here's the first one. Now, this is hot off the press. Okay. This is a mandate. This is a federal mandate. Okay. All tenants should have access to safe, quality, accessible, and affordable housing. Now, I know that many of you know this information, but for those who are new investors, or for those who are thinking about becoming a rental housing provider, I want to break it down for you on the level that even a 5th grader can understand. Okay. So here's the thing. Here is an example of access to safe housing. That means that tenants living in a place that doesn't pose any health or safety risk, because that would definitely be a violation of the law. Okay. A home, for instance, with working smoke detectors. Next week, I'm going to touch on this a little bit deeper. I do have some pictures where a property in Washington, D.C. did not have smoke detectors, and the entire building went up in smoke. That landlord had a housing inspection. It failed the inspection. And before the landlord was able to make repairs, something happened in one of the rental units and it impacted all the tenants. And so my goal is to try to prevent landlords from going down that rabbit hole and making costly mistakes, because sometimes people do things because of 2 reasons, either because they don't know or because they don't care. And for those of you who don't know, I want to give you this information to make sure that you are knowledgeable and you know this information. All right. So working smoke detectors, making sure that the doors are operable. I recently did a housing inspection, and I think it was a 4-bedroom house, and every door that I touched, it didn't latch. It was inoperable. Maybe the lock didn't work, or the lock was on reverse. And so that was a violation. And I know that it's those small things that sometimes people take for granted. But when you have tenants, especially those who are participating in a housing program, and you have a housing inspection that is coming up, or you know that the property will be inspected at some point in time, or maybe you are thinking of adding your property to one of these programs, you need to know that there is a standard. Okay. And in that situation, like I said, every doorknob that I touch, it failed. And it's the small things that sometimes people overlook, or maybe contractors are not knowledgeable of what the housing code standards are in that jurisdiction. Make sure that as a housing provider, as a owner, that you are paying quality contractors who know what the codes are, or at least give them a checklist of the things that they should be doing, and then also follow up to make sure that it's done. Do not leave your rental property business in the hands of somebody else expecting for them to know it. As an owner, and I know that some of you don't know the laws, some of you don't know housing codes, but it is in your best interest to find out in that jurisdiction what your responsibilities are, because the laws don't really care whether you know or not. It is an expectation that you're professional and that you know what the laws are. And so again, that's one of the reasons why I do this every week. This costs you nothing but your time to show up to get this information. All right, so I'm gonna move on because I don't really have a lot of time to go deep into it. But when it comes to quality housing, one of the things that I want you to know about quality housing is this: it should be well maintained, it should be comfortable. For instance, it should be properly insulated. The HVAC system should work. It should not have any dust, any particles, any mold, or anything blowing out of the vents. That will be a problem. Okay. There should be no structural damage. Okay. All right. So here is an example for accessible housing. So when it comes to accessible housing, you want to make sure that if there are tenants who are maybe disabled, who are renting your place, or they're thinking about renting your place, if they say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, I'm disabled, first and foremost, and I'm not going to get too deep into it because I don't really have time for that today, but I'll come back and I'll revisit this in another segment. You cannot, as a landlord, property manager, please hear me. When it comes to fair housing laws, you cannot ask a person what their disability is. That is against the law. Okay. If you do not see a wheelchair, or maybe you don't see that the person appears to be physically disabled. Well, here's the thing about a disability: it could be a physical or a mental disorder. And so, impairment rather. And so that means sometimes you won't see the disability, but please never ask a participant, a tenant, or whoever, what their disability is, because you can find yourself in a hot seat and have a lawsuit filed against you. So I want you to know that. But if they are asking for special accommodations, here's the thing. If you are a private owner, you can give the tenant permission to have those modifications completed on the property without you paying for it. So for instance, if it is going to create a financial hardship and a tenant is asking for special modifications, you can say, hey, listen, Mr. and Mrs. Tenant, we received your request. We are in agreement. However, we will permit you to have the modifications completed. However, it must be conducted by a professional, and you want to verify that whoever's doing a modification. So for instance, it could be maybe like a grab bar in the bathtub, right? And so usually sometimes people who have mobility issues, they may need a grab bar to hold on to when they're in the shower or in the tub, right? And so if you don't currently have it in your rental property and you want to have it installed, you can also allow that tenant to have, a professional to install it. But they also must know that when they move out of the property, that it has to be returned to the original condition as when they first moved in. All right. And so here's a third point of number one: access to safe, accessible, and affordable housing. So you want to make sure that, and I'm definitely touching on this next week. I had someone to email me just today, and so I'm going to walk through this for owners to know in advance whether or not a tenant or potential tenant can afford the property. All right. Affordable housing. It means that that tenant is not paying more than 30% of the income. Okay. And so in some cases, I know that tenants, especially when they're in a tight situation, they're willing to pay 30 or 40 or 50% of their income. But let me just say to you that as either a landlord, an owner, a property manager, please don't ever allow a tenant to rent your property if they cannot afford it. Here's why. Things happen, emergencies come up, holidays come up, Christmas situations come up, right? And if they already cannot afford the rent, they have to pull money from somewhere. Where's the first place they're going to pull money from? The rent. Okay. And so you want to make sure that they could afford to rent the property before they move in. I know that some of you especially those of you who are participating in the Housing Choice Voucher Program. You allow tenants to pay extra money, which is illegal. Okay, let me just we hear, okay, eyeball to eyeball. That is illegal, and I know that some of you are doing it, right, because you want to get as much money as you can, right? But just know that it is illegal. That is a side payment, and anything that's not approved by that agency is an illegal payment. But that's another day, another segment. So anyway, you want to make sure that the tenants can't afford it, because if you are allowing them to pay more than they can afford, it is a financial hardship on them, and eventually or potentially could be a financial hardship on you if they're not able to pay the difference. Okay, so you want to make sure that it's 30% of the income. And if you need more information, I can walk you through it, show you how to calculate it so that you'll know at the point where they are completing the application whether or not they could afford it, unless they are participating in a housing program. And of course, the housing subsidy will act as income because that is a protected class. All right. And so here's the second thing. The Biden-Harris administration, they want to make sure that all landlords are providing leases that are clear and fair. So that means that the lease should not have any information that is unfavorable for tenants or landlords for that matter. So for instance, if it's something pertaining to maintenance and you know that that's something that you should cover, go ahead and correct your lease. Now is the time to make changes, make amendments, make revisions to your rental lease agreements if you think that it may be out of order or illegal, because it's always better to err on the side of caution, right? And so if you take a look at your lease, and I strongly recommend that all of you take a look at those rental lease agreements, see if there's anything in there that may violate the law. Okay, and now is the time to correct it, because at least you can show that you've taken steps to correct the mistake or the behavior from prior years versus allowing it to continue on. Something happens and that tenant takes you to court, because here's the thing, tenants are understanding their rights. Okay, and a lot of tenants are recognizing that they could sue their landlord for what may be something small to you. It may be something major to them, and it could cost a lot of money. Okay, and I said earlier in the year that we're going to start to see a lot more lawsuits filed against landlords by tenants, and we are starting to see it. Tenants recognize that they do have rights, and especially in the areas that are pro-tenant. Okay, the laws are strongly in favor for tenants. And so with this new mandate, this blueprint that came out from the White House, it's going to impact how many of you are doing business. So please check your business practice, get it together, make sure you have policies and procedures in place. Yeah, definitely do that. So you want to make sure that the lease is clear and it's fair. All right, a fair lease, again, it doesn't have any language that is going to violate the law, right? And so you want to make sure that you don't discourage tenants from being educated. You don't discourage tenants from enforcing the lease, or because here's the thing, right? So when it comes to tenants taking landlords to court, they can enforce the lease as well. And so you definitely don't want to put anything in a lease, and you don't want to try to prevent or stop tenants from taking you to court. You don't want to retaliate, because that is also against the law. And I know that sometimes things are not working out the way that you desire. I know that sometimes, now I'm going to say this, and please don't email me. I'm a landlord and tenant coach. I love landlords. I also love tenants, but I love truth, right? And so there are some tenants from hell. Okay. Now, if you have a tenant from hell, which means that you have a tenant that is emphatically cussing you out, refusing to allow you in to make repairs and do the right thing, because many of you are really trying to do the right thing, but sometimes you have a difficult tenant who will intentionally try to make it hard for you and will try to ring the alarm as if you've done something wrong. Okay. And so when that's happening, I call those tenants from hell. Now, for the landlords who are not making repairs and they're only collecting rent, I call them slumlords. Okay. Again, Please don't email me. I will respond to you. I believe in truth and integrity. So when it comes to renters' rights, again, tenants recognize that they do have rights. You cannot take that away from them. Please, ma'am, please, sir, do not violate tenant rights. And if you have any questions pertaining to this, feel free to email me. I will definitely follow with you. I'll send you links. I'll get you on the right track. I'll just need to know what jurisdiction your rental property is in and try to connect you to the right authority, the right source. All right. When it comes to tenants trying to organize, there was a national um, story that aired about maybe a month ago. I think it was a month and a half ago, where property manager, and it was all over the news. This property manager was caught on camera, recorded by the tenant. The property manager was caught violating the tenant rights. So the tenant, in the video, the tenant walked into the office and was seemingly alarmed or disturbed by that property manager taking the flyers down. So obviously the tenants in that building put up notices that they were going to organize some sort of association and exercise their rights as tenants. And maybe they had complaints against this property manager, perhaps. And in the video, the property manager is telling the tenant to get out of the office or whatever, and the tenant refuses to leave. And so the property manager, for whatever reason, commences to pull out pepper spray and actually pepper sprayed the tenant. Okay, pepper spray, mace, or whatever. I don't know. Either way, it was wrong. And as a property manager, I listen, again, I get it. Sometimes that landlord and tenant relationship is not the best, right? You can't manage people, but you can manage the relationship. And if you're having struggles, if you're having challenges with managing that relationship, then maybe get someone else to do it. Maybe take a step back. Maybe that's not for you, right? But don't get yourself in a situation like this person did. So they ended up going to jail because the tenant filed charges against that property manager. And I'm sure that they lost their job, right? And so you don't want this to happen to you, especially if you're working for a company. And if you're self-managing your property, please never, ever, ever wear your feelings on your sleeve. One of the things that I always say, I live by this philosophy. I teach this philosophy and I share it so frequently. If you treat your business like a business, it will pay you like a business. So in treating it like a business, you can't get emotional when things don't work out, because a pipe will break. Sometimes tenants will intentionally do stuff. I've seen tenants pour cement down the toilet. I've seen like some of the worst situations that you could think of. So between managing property and me being a housing inspector, I've been in this space for well over 20 plus years. And so nothing really surprises me, right? And so that's why I kind of advocate the way that I do for tenants as well as landlords, because I want to create a balance. I want to educate the entire rental community. But sometimes, no matter how nice you are, no matter how much you spend time trying to educate people, you can't force a person to receive it, right? And so in situations where tenants are trying to organize, you have to allow them to do that. Even if organizing or an association they're trying to create is against you, you cannot stop them from doing that. All right. They are also entitled to a due process when it comes to evictions. Landlords, please hear me. I've had people who did not know the law. They violated tenant laws by just walking into the property or handwriting a notice to say, hey, I want you out in 5, 10, 15 days. Now, if your property is in a jurisdiction and you can give the tenant a short-term notice like that, then fine, but know what the laws are. But definitely in Washington, D.C., you must use the forms that are available at the Department of Housing and Community Development. So just because you want to tenant out, or let's just say the initial lease term is up, the tenant has been there for 12 months, let's say 10 months, and you realize, you know what, I don't like this tenant. Things are not working out. It's not what I thought, so I'm just going to terminate the lease. Well, in DC and in some jurisdictions, you have to have a reason to terminate that lease. And just to terminate the lease, just because, you can't do that in DC. Now, in some jurisdictions, you can choose to not renew the lease, but you have to know what the laws are because, again, they are not the same. And if a tenant is not paying the rent, you must take them to court. All right. Look at your lease, see what your options are. Definitely speak with a reputable landlord and tenant attorney who can guide you on that. I'm not an attorney. I'm not giving you legal advice, but I'm just telling you that if you have questions pertaining to that, please speak with an attorney. Okay. And so those are the top 5 things that came out of that blueprint. So, but I do want to give some tips for tenants because I want you to know that you do have rights. And many of you have probably already heard this before, but I want to share today because I have some new viewers who are tuned in for the first time. So this is just FYI for tenants. If you ever think that there is some sort of violation, okay, you want to document the violation, take pictures, take videos. And if there, so when I say violation, meaning in the home, right, there's some repairs that need to be made, let your landlord know. Notify the landlord. Notice it says preferably in writing. So you can call your landlord, but definitely notify them in writing. And if that doesn't work and you feel like you're being discriminated against, you can report that to HUD. That's United States Department of Housing and Urban Development. All right. And also seek legal advice. Please don't take matters into your own hands. Okay. It's always better to seek legal advice. I know that sometimes as a tenant, you may feel like your landlord has violated you and you're not going to pay your rent and things of that sort. Well, unless you go to court, you're still required to pay your rent. And if you're not paying your rent, then your landlord can take you to court. All right. And so the 5th thing for you as a tenant is when it comes to legal action, if the landlord fails to resolve the matter, you can definitely take them to court, but you will need to speak with an attorney because that's the best thing to do versus trying to handle the matter on your own. Because sometimes you may have good intentions, and this is for both of you, landlords as well as tenants. Sometimes you have good intentions and it may seem like it's a clear case, but if you don't know the law and you go before the judge, no matter how wrong the other party is, if your ducks are not lined up in a row, then the court may dismiss your case, may kick it out. So you want to slam dunk. So you want to make sure that you understand what you can and cannot do. You want to make sure that you have all of your I's dotted and all your T's crossed. Okay. And so I can't give you information on that because the laws are going to be different in the different states and jurisdictions. So I do hope that that was helpful. That's what I wanted to share with you today. Please make sure that you are following me each and every week because each week is a different topic. And so next week, I'm going to talk for those of you who have property in the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program, especially in Washington, D.C. I'm sharing information so that you will know as a landlord what is a reasonable rent before you rent to the program. Or if you are thinking about getting a rent increase, I've recently worked with a landlord whereas they asked for a rent increase and they didn't check to see what the current rate was. So they submitted the request asking for a rent increase. And turns out they received notification from the housing agency saying, hey, thank you so much, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord. We received your request for your rent increase. Unfortunately, we are not able to give you a rent increase. Now I'm just paraphrasing. I'm not reading the letter verbatim. Thank you for your request for the rent increase. We value you as a landlord in the program. Unfortunately, the rent is too high, so we're going to reduce the rent. So they got a reduction in the rent, which is something they were not expecting. And so I'm going to touch on that next week. Please make sure that you're tuned in. Please make sure that if you have questions, you email me. Let me provide you with my email address because this is the best way to contact me. I will follow up. If you have a topic that you would like for me to discuss, please email me. And then also I recognize because this is what I do once a week. I'm on every Monday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I recognize that some of you may have questions that you don't want to share on air. You have comments you don't want to share live. And I would love to know if For those of you who are interested, I'm thinking of creating a community just for landlords. It will be online, but it's not on Facebook. It's not on social media. And if you are interested in it, please email me where I go live in the community. I'm answering all of your questions. And I think that creating a community such as that will be beneficial for a lot of you who are tuning in. Some of you watch the replay, and because you're watching the replay, you can't ask your questions because I'm not live, right? And so in that community space, you can ask questions. I will respond and provide a whole lot of helpful information. And so if you're interested, please email me. That is my email address at the bottom of the screen. It is info@landlordlife.com, info@landlordlife.com. Thank you so much for joining me. I know that this was a lot to take in 30 minutes. And I wish I had more time, but please make sure that you come back next week. Email me your comments, email me your questions, email me any subject matters that you would like for me to cover. Okay. So I thank you so much. My time is up and I thank you for yours. So that's my email address. Please share it. Please like, tag, and share this information if you found it helpful today. Is that all right? All right. I'm going to sign off for now and I'll see you all next week. Hello, Mr. Ricks. Thank you so much for tuning in.